My name is Marietta Boone. I'm 62 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family.
She was just a widow, or so they thought, until a bowl of soup, a slammed door, and one whispered secret unraveled a legacy buried beneath decades of silence. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's about memory, truth, and a woman who reclaimed herself from the ashes.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
If I had known that pot of soup would mark the end of everything I thought I understood about love, blood, and legacy, I'd have burned it. It was a Sunday. Not one of those peaceful, rocking chair on the porch Sundays, but the kind that carried a strange electricity in the air. My hands had trembled slightly as I diced carrots and crushed garlic. I had steeped the broth slowly, adding just a touch of Earl Grey and crushed jasmine petals, Walter's old favourite blend. To me, the aroma was memory, but to Sierra, it might as well have been rot. She walked in like a breeze too cold for spring, her heels clicking against the hardwood like warning shots. Hair pulled back tight, lips lined to perfection. She wore that coral blouse she always did when she wanted to seem soft. It didn't work. I placed the bowls gently on the table. "Chicken and herb," I said. "Something warm for the soul." Sierra leaned forward and sniffed. One delicate wrinkle of her nose was all it took. "Is that floral?" she asked, like she'd discovered mold. "There's a little jasmine in the broth," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "Walter always liked it that way. It settles the nerves." She looked down at the soup like it was a mistake she'd have to pretend didn't happen. "Interesting choice," she said flatly, then turned to Cameron. "Did you know she used to wear a jasmine perfume? I read somewhere it was used in old Southern households to cover the smell of mildew." That one hit straight to the bone. Cameron chuckled softly, barely looking up from his phone. "She gets creative in the kitchen." I sat across from them, trying to will my pulse to slow. The spoon in my hand felt heavier than it should. My eyes flicked to Walter, who sat quietly at the end of the table. His body thinner than last fall, eyes more sunken, but still dignified in his silence. Lunch dragged like a wagon through mud. Every clink of silverware felt rehearsed, every sip of water choreographed. I could feel something brewing, something more than just disdain for my soup. Then Cameron cleared his throat and set his napkin aside. "Mum, we've been thinking," he started. "This place, it's too much for you now. The house is old, upkeep's a burden. You've got Dad to take care of, and you deserve somewhere peaceful." Sierra smiled like a knife. "There's a lovely condo opening up near Battery Park. Walkable, gated, secure, much more manageable." I didn't say a word. Not yet. I waited. Cameron continued. "We're ready to take over responsibilities here. Renovate, maybe rent it out, or sell. There's equity sitting in these walls, and it's not doing anyone any good." Sierra laid a folder on the table. "It's all prepared. We just need your signature on the deed. No pressure." That's when I felt it. That low thrum in my chest. The same one I'd felt when my mother died and left me this house. The same one I felt when Walter had his first stroke. Grief, anger, and disbelief all braided into a single cold wave. "You want me to sign away the only home I've ever known?" I asked, my voice like wet stone scraping dry pavement. "It's just practical, Mum," Cameron said, shifting in his seat. "It's not like you're being evicted. We want what's best for you." "No," I said quietly. "This house is Boone history. Walter and I built a life here. This is not paperwork. This is blood." "Then don't make it harder than it needs to be," Sierra said sharply. We're trying to help. But her voice had no kindness in it, only calculation. Cameron stood. Sierra followed. And then, without a moment's warning, the basement door opened behind me. 2 men stood in the doorway, both in contractor polos, faces blank. "What is this?" I asked, standing slowly. "Please don't make this difficult," Cameron said again. But this time it wasn't a request, it was a command. Walter tried to rise, shaky on his feet. I caught him just in time. "Come on now," one of the men said. "Let's not make a scene." A scene? They took Walter's other arm. I clutched his hand tighter, and in that moment I felt the chill of his skin, the fragility of him. Bones under a paper-thin layer of skin. He said nothing, only looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen so clear in weeks. They led us down the basement steps. I hadn't been down there in years. The air was stale. My heels clicked against the cement as we descended. A bulb buzzed weakly above, casting shadows that felt too long. The men shut the door behind us. I heard the lock slide into place. It was so quiet. My breath caught in my throat. Walter sank down slowly on an old wooden chair beside the furnace. The paint on the wall beside us had peeled in strips. It smelled of old mold and wet dirt. I crouched next to him, trembling. "What do they think they're doing?" He coughed, wet, deep, and painful, and grabbed my wrist. "Hush," he whispered, voice like gravel. "They don't know what's behind that wall." My eyes followed where he pointed. A patch of bricks, duller than the others, a line of mortar that didn't match. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, then leaned back, exhausted. I turned and pressed my palm to the wall. It was cold, solid, but something felt off, like it had been opened once, closed again, hidden. My heart pounded. Above us, footsteps. They'd locked us down here like an inconvenience, like clutter in the attic. This wasn't just about the house. This was about erasing me. But they'd forgotten something. I wasn't just the wife who made soup. I was the keeper of this house, the one who remembered every crack in the foundation and every ghost in the hallway. They could take the keys. They could take my silence. But they couldn't take what was buried in these walls. There's a silence that only comes after betrayal. It doesn't roar. It seeps in, through the window panes, through the crack in the door, through the space between your son's eyes and the boy he used to be. After they let us out of the basement, 2 hours that felt like exile, they acted like nothing happened. Sierra handed me a fresh towel. Cameron brought tea. Not the way I made it, strong and honest, but diluted. The way you offer something warm to someone whose usefulness has just expired. I didn't drink it. Instead, I sat at the edge of the sofa, watching Sierra float through the living room like she owned the floorboards. Her heels clicked sharply with every step, an unspoken message written in code only a woman like me would recognize. Not so long ago, those steps belonged to me. They echoed with Sunday chores, birthday parties, late-night pacing while waiting for Walter's truck to pull into the drive. But now, those steps weren't mine. They were hers. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike pierced deeper than any word she could have said. There was a faint scent trailing behind her. Her signature mix of jasmine and Earl Grey. It was expensive, clean, artificial. She misted it in every room she entered, the way exterminators spray corners for pests. It clung to my drapes, my cushions, the damn doorknobs. If I opened a drawer, there it was. The scent of revision. It was haunting, and yet oddly familiar. Walter used to drink Earl Grey when he couldn't sleep. Jasmine was my favourite bath soap when Cameron was little. Back then, those smells meant comfort. Now they meant displacement, rebranding, something dying and being dressed up to look better than before. She was trying to scrub me out of my own life. And Cameron, well, he was letting her. I stood in the hallway watching her arrange donation boxes filled with the things I'd collected over 40 years. China sets from Walter's mother, my father's armchair, framed family photos that didn't match her minimalist aesthetic, all labelled, all taped shut, like they were doing the house a favour. My heart squeezed as I walked toward the staircase. On the second floor, I passed Cameron's old bedroom, the door ajar. The sunlight from the window spilled across the faded green carpet. That room hadn't been touched much, maybe out of guilt or laziness. But the piano was gone. I stood in the doorway, remembering. Cameron at 6, legs barely reaching the pedals, pressing each key like it was magic. He used to get so frustrated when his fingers didn't move fast enough. Walter would kneel beside him, calm as a monk, showing him again and again how to play scales with patience. "I can't," Cameron used to cry. "You will," Walter always replied. I swallowed hard and closed the door. The man sleeping across the hall now barely resembled the one who taught Cameron to play. Since his stroke, Walter had grown quiet, withdrawn. But his eyes still spoke, volumes, especially when they met mine the moment we were pushed into that cold basement. They told me, "This isn't just greed. This is betrayal. And worse, it's coming from your own blood." Back downstairs, Sierra was in the study. I hovered outside the door just long enough to hear her on the phone. "Yes, the transfer is delayed again. She's being difficult," she whispered. "I'll handle it. Don't worry, the old man won't last much longer." My stomach turned. My fingers clenched so tightly, the edge of the stair rail left dents in my skin. I backed away before she could notice me. Retreating to the kitchen, I stared at the counter. Once the heart of our home. That's where Cameron had eaten his birthday pancakes, where I'd cried after my miscarriage, where Walter had stood behind me, arms around my waist, humming Nat King Cole as we danced between dishes. Now it was sterile, empty. Even the spice rack had been rearranged. I reached for a small tin in the corner, one Sierra hadn't found yet. It held dried jasmine petals and Earl Grey leaves, the good kind. The kind Walter liked before he lost his words. I opened it and let the scent rise. And that's when I realized she was using my scent, not hers, mine. She hadn't brought a new identity into this house. She was replacing mine. I closed the tin and sat at the table, hands trembling. A wave of memory swept through me. Cameron, 5 years old, wrapped in a towel after his bath, climbing into my lap and saying, "I never want to live anywhere but here, Mama. This is our forever house." Forever. I blinked back the tears, not because I was sad, but because I was waking up. I'd been blind for years, blaming Sierra for every slight, but now I saw it clearly. Cameron was not a victim. He was a participant. He had chosen convenience over conscience, silence over truth. His betrayal was not loud or cruel. It was quiet, passive, but no less devastating. And that silence, that breath between Sierra's steps and Cameron's decisions, was where the betrayal lived. Tap, tap, tap. I heard her coming again, down the hallway, toward the kitchen. I didn't flinch. Sierra stepped in, arms folded. "I've ordered new towels for your bathroom," she said cheerfully. I thought something fresh would feel nice. I met her gaze, steady. "You can keep them. The ones I have are just fine." She tilted her head, still smiling. "You don't have to be stubborn, Marietta. Change is good." I stood. Not aggressively, not loudly, but she stepped back all the same. "No," I said. "Change is inevitable. But erasure, that's a choice." She said nothing. I brushed past her, moving slowly, letting the silence follow me like a cloak. I had one thing left she didn't know about. A wall. A secret. A man who once whispered something in the dark that still echoed in my bones. They don't know what's behind that wall. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, and the house felt different. Not quieter, not colder, but heavier. Like the walls knew what I now knew, that there was something here beneath the surface, something not meant for light, but too important to stay buried. Walter's words still echoed in my ears, like a whisper pressed into the skin. They don't know what's behind that wall. It hadn't been just delirium. He hadn't just been rambling from the fog of his mind. No, that was a message, a lifeline. I wrapped a shawl over my nightdress, slipped my feet into slippers, and padded out into the hallway. The door to Cameron and Sierra's room was shut tight. No footsteps yet, no scent of jasmine spray fouling the air. The key to the basement still hung where it always had, on the tarnished nail behind the pantry door. I took it down with slow fingers. The metal was cool against my palm, grounding. I descended the basement steps alone. Each step creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder with every inch I dropped below the kitchen. That old basement had always felt like a mausoleum of forgotten things. Walter's rusting tools, paint cans turned solid, stacks of newspapers no one remembered keeping. But this morning, I wasn't afraid. I was angry, quietly, deliberately angry. I stood in the far left corner where Walter had pointed. The bricks were a shade darker, the mortar uneven. I reached out and ran my fingertips over the surface. It didn't feel like the rest of the wall. It felt newer, like someone had tried too hard to make it look old. I found the pry bar still resting by the tool shelf, the same one Walter used to hang on the wall next to his hammer and level, lined up like soldiers. I wedged it under the edge of one brick and pulled. It gave with a soft groan. The first brick came loose, then another. My hands shook, not from fear, but from something deeper, anticipation, grief. Behind the fourth brick, I saw it, a metal box, dull grey, wrapped in layers of oilcloth that had grown brittle with time. I pulled it free with both hands and set it on the old workbench beneath the single bare bulb. The silence of the basement was thick, like the air had turned to wool. My pulse pounded in my ears. I peeled back the cloth slowly, revealing the lid. The box wasn't locked, just latched. Inside there were papers, yellowed, curled at the edges, and brittle. On top, a photograph. A boy with messy hair standing beside a tall man in a military uniform. The boy was smiling too wide, like someone had told him to look brave. The name written on the back, in faded ink, Augustus Shaw, 1958. My knees nearly buckled. I braced myself against the bench. My husband wasn't Walter Boone. He was Augustus Shaw. The man I had loved, slept beside for over 30 years, had lived beneath a name that wasn't his. Not out of shame, but survival. Tears didn't come, not right away. Only silence and questions. So, many questions. I reached for the bundle beneath the photo. Letters, court documents, even a birth certificate. The name was clear. Augustus Benjamin Shaw, born in Raleigh, North Carolina, son of Congressman Philip Shaw. My breath caught. Philip Shaw. I remembered that name from somewhere. A scandal. A family that fell apart in the 60s. A son who disappeared. And Walter, my Walter, had been that son. Underneath the documents was a letter, folded tight, yellowed but intact. The writing on the front was unmistakable. Marietta. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. My Marietta, if you're reading this, it means I no longer have the strength to tell you. I wish I had sooner. I should have. But some truths are heavy, not because they're ugly, but because they carry everything we tried to forget. My real name is Augustus Shaw. I was born into a name soaked in power and politics and things no child should witness. When my mother died, my uncle, Walter Boone, took me in. He saved me, changed my name, hid me from the spotlight and the sins of my father. When I met you, I was still figuring out who I was. You gave me a name I wanted to live up to, and I did my best. I swear to you, nothing about our life was false, except the name. There's something else. Cameron isn't my biological son. You know that. But what you don't know is, he was adopted through a private arrangement, one that sealed off his records completely. We agreed to raise him with love, not secrets. But lately, I've seen a darkness in him, something I don't recognize. In this box is everything you need to protect yourself, to protect this house, to protect what we built together. I'm sorry, and I love you, more than I ever thought a man like me could love anything. Walter, always Walter, for you. By the time I finished reading, the tears had come, not from betrayal. No, this wasn't betrayal. This was protection. He hadn't lied to me. He had covered me like a roof in a storm, never asking me to know the shape of the clouds above. And now he was giving me the truth, not as a confession, but a tool. I wrapped the documents in fresh cloth, not the brittle oilcloth they'd sat in for years, but a white linen towel. The same kind Sierra had tried to throw out, calling them too old to bother saving. I held the bundle to my chest and climbed the stairs, one careful step at a time. The house was waking. I heard Sierra's voice upstairs, sweet and performative. Walter coughed faintly down the hall. I passed the study, opened the drawer where he kept his war medals and tax papers, and tucked the box beneath a false bottom he'd once shown me, long ago. Then I went to Walter. He lay still, eyes half open, lips parted. But when I sat beside him, his hand shifted, just a twitch. His eyes met mine, searching. I found it, I whispered. He blinked, slow and deliberate. One blink. Yes. I'm not angry, I added, my voice thick, with everything I couldn't say. I understand now. His hand found mine. Cold, yes, but sure. Even in this fading state, he still held strength enough to squeeze. He trusted me to carry the truth. And I would. That night, as the jasmine bloomed outside and Sierra sprayed over everything again, like she was fighting ghosts, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of strong black tea. Not her tea. Mine. I lit a candle, pulled out my notepad, and began to write. Walter had given me more than just a secret. He'd given me the beginning of a plan. There was a time when people came to me for the truth. Not for advice or comfort. Truth. The kind etched into brittle paper, sealed in wax, written in cursive no one teaches anymore. I spent 22 years in the Charleston Historical Society, sorting out land disputes, family lines, and scandals buried under layers of dust and shame. People don't realize how much power a trained memory holds. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. It had been days since I found Walter's letter, since I touched the fragile birth certificate that bore the name Augustus Shaw in elegant ink, since I'd read the sentence that struck deeper than any lie. Cameron isn't my biological son. And yet I wasn't shaken. I was still, like loaded dynamite under a wooden floor. I'd sat for hours at the old desk in our study, the same one Walter used to write checks and read the newspaper. I'd cleared away the old mail, the dried pens, the framed photo of a younger us. In their place, the contents of the metal box, his secret archive, my inheritance. Each paper I touched reminded me of who I had been before I was a wife, before I was someone's mother. I had been a keeper of records, a witness to time. And now, I would become the documentarian of my own war. The adoption paperwork was real, but sealed. The judge's signature crooked. The notary stamp incomplete. The inconsistencies sang to me. My hands didn't shake as I sorted and annotated, just like I used to. It was almost comforting, like slipping into a language only I could read. I reviewed the forged property transfer Sierra and Cameron had tried to get me to sign. I had refused instinctively, but now I examined it carefully. The signature line bore my name, but not my hand. The curves were too sharp. The flourish on the B in Boone. Walter used to tease me about that loop. It wasn't there. They thought they could fake my name and I wouldn't notice. They thought my memory was weak. But I remembered everything. I opened my black ledger, the one I hadn't touched in years. I used to record estate inventories in it, pages inked with names and dates that meant something to families trying to prove what was theirs. Now, I recorded my own case. Exhibit A, Walter's letter. Exhibit B, birth certificate, Augustus Shaw. Exhibit C, adoption file for Cameron Boone. Inconsistencies noted. Exhibit D, forged deed transfer. Signature mismatch. I stared at the list and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders square on their own. My chin lift without effort. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't senile. I was the archivist, and I needed an ally. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in almost a decade. When the voicemail beeped, I said calmly, "Amara Sterling, this is Marietta Boone. I have a box of documents and a very large storm coming. I need you to come home." I met Amara back when she was just a bright-eyed law student who volunteered in the records room. She was precise, sharp, kind. I used to joke that she could read a probate ledger like it was scripture. She used to call me Miss Boone, even after I told her to stop. 2 hours later, my phone rang. "Miss Boone?" came her voice, older now, deeper, but unmistakable. "Amara?" I said. "I need you to see something." The next day, she arrived in a navy blue pantsuit and flats, no frills, just business. She hugged me gently, more gently than I expected, and looked me in the eye. "I heard about Walter," she said softly. I nodded. "He left me something. But I don't think he meant it as a goodbye." We sat at the kitchen table, my battlefield, and I laid out the papers like a general preparing maps for war. She didn't interrupt as she read, just scanned and flipped, her lips tightening, her eyebrows drawing closer with every page. When she finished, she sat back and blew out a breath. "This is a lot." "Yes," I said, "but I think it's enough. It's more than enough. Cameron and Sierra may have committed fraud. Depending on how they tried to push that deed, it could be criminal, especially if they presented it to any banks or investors." "They did," I said. I overheard Sierra on the phone, talking about it like I was already gone. Amara stared at me for a moment. Then, "Do you want to go to court? This won't be fast or easy." I looked at the papers, then back at her. "I don't want to destroy him," I said quietly. "I want to stop him, and I want to keep this house." Amara nodded. "Then we start with a cease and desist. I'll draft one tonight. After that, we can file for injunctive relief and protective order on your assets. If the forged deed was shared externally, We'll press for immediate reversal. It all sounded very formal, very big, and very necessary. I leaned back in my chair. There's one more thing, I said. I'm staying here, with them, at least until the hearing. Amara blinked. Are you sure that's safe? They think I'm tired, I said. Let them. She studied me, then smiled. You're still the same woman who once told me, every document tells two stories, the one on the page and the one between the lines. And this one's personal, I said. I intend to tell it myself. That night, I went to the garden and found the potted geraniums Sierra had moved to the back steps, half dead from neglect. I brought them inside and repotted them with fresh soil, placing them on the kitchen windowsill. She hated them, called them old lady flowers, but they were mine. As I wiped the dirt from my hands, I looked around the kitchen. Same tile, same drawer handles, same view. But everything was different now. I was no longer a bystander. I was the record keeper of my own home. The historian of a betrayal that wouldn't bury me. Let them underestimate me. They forgot one thing. Archivists know how to keep receipts. The morning I reclaimed the geraniums was the morning I declared war. Of course, no one knew it. Sierra was upstairs rehearsing her smile in the mirror, and Cameron had already vanished into his phone calls, muttering about asset leverage and interest points, as if he were managing a company and not dismantling his own family. But I was up before them, as always. In the silence, I moved like smoke, soft, but everywhere. I stepped out back in my robe, barefoot, and bent over the pile where Sierra had dumped the flower pots. She hadn't even bothered to remove the plants before tossing them. Just upended the whole thing like it was garbage, like they were past use, past beauty, like me. I dug through damp soil and found what was left of the roots. They were dry and tangled, but they were still roots, still holding on. I brought them in, cleaned the pots, repacked them with fresh dirt from the corner of the yard where Walter used to compost eggshells and coffee grounds. I could still smell the memory of him in that earth, still feel his calloused hands brushing mine when we planted spring onions together years ago. I placed the geraniums on the kitchen windowsill. That window had seen birthdays, rainstorms, and the steam from every meal I ever made for my family. It deserved to see something survive. They were my banner now, my quiet protest. That morning, I brewed coffee the old way. Percolator on the stove, the aroma full and round, not the weak stuff Sierra preferred. I fried bacon, scrambled eggs with cheese and chives, and set the table like it mattered again. Cameron wandered in, already mid-conversation with someone on speakerphone. No, she's still here, he said casually. We'll push the paperwork once we have a clean inspection. Yeah, she won't fight. She's tired. He paused when he saw me. I smiled as I poured his coffee. Black, right? Just how your father used to drink it. He blinked, unsure. Yeah, thanks. Sierra floated in a few minutes later, eyes sweeping the table. You've been busy. Just cooking for my family? I said. One of the few things they haven't tried to take from me. She ignored the barb. You didn't need to go to all this trouble. Trouble, I said slowly, is when you're forced to eat food you didn't ask for in a house you no longer recognize. She raised an eyebrow, then busied herself with her phone. But her glance lingered on the blooming geraniums. Good. Let her notice. Let her feel that unease creeping in. The one that says, you miscalculated. Every day after that, I played my role with precision. I folded towels Sierra never thanked me for. I hummed while sweeping the same floors she once claimed were outdated. I clipped fresh herbs from Walter's old patch and let their scent fill the kitchen. Lavender, rosemary, memory. I gave them no reason to suspect a thing. While they plotted handovers and staged photographs for real estate brochures, I built a different kind of file, the legal kind. I made photocopies of everything: Walter's letter, the sealed adoption record, the original deed tucked behind the boiler, the scanned document Amara confirmed had a forged signature. At night, when the house grew quiet, I typed notes. I highlighted inconsistencies. I logged timestamps. I kept a journal of every time Sierra or Cameron mentioned the future. Every reference to "when you're no longer here," every smug smile and slip of tongue they thought I wouldn't catch. Archivists don't just preserve facts. We remember what people forget they've said. The cost, of course, was sleep. I averaged 4 hours a night. My body ached in places it hadn't in years. My hands, once steady from decades of sorting fragile parchment, now trembled when I poured tea. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not when I walked past Walter each morning and saw the spark in his eyes return, even briefly. He couldn't speak, but his gaze told me he knew, that he felt me holding the line, that I was still standing. One evening, I brought him a cup of chamomile and rested it on the table beside his armchair. "They think I'm folding," I whispered. "But I'm not. I'm just pressing seams." His hand twitched in reply. I sat with him in the quiet and reread the line from his letter for the 10th time that week. "You'll know what to do, Marietta." I did, and I was doing it. Sierra slipped up on a Thursday. She was pacing the foyer on the phone with someone named Christy. "We just need her out. Cameron's worried it'll look bad if she contests anything, but honestly, once we move her into the condo, we can just clean it all out. Stage it neutral. No personal clutter." Personal clutter. That was how she saw my life. I didn't confront her. I just made a note. Then I went to the living room and turned on Walter's old jazz records. I let Coltrane play through the halls while I baked cornbread, his favorite. I served it with butter and silence. And when Sierra asked, "What's the occasion?" I said, "Some things are worth remembering before they're erased." She didn't respond. But again, she glanced at the geraniums. They were brighter now, stubbornly beautiful. That weekend, I submitted a sworn statement to Amara, outlining everything I'd witnessed since Walter's first stroke. Every conversation, every unspoken pressure, every hint of coercion. Amara replied with one sentence. "You're not just holding ground, you're reclaiming it." On Sunday, as the sky turned soft with dusk, I stood in the kitchen and watered the geraniums again. They'd started blooming red. Bright, unapologetic red. The kind of red that refused to be ignored. The kind of red that said, "You tried to bury me?" But I remembered where the sun was. I watched the petals sway gently in the breeze from the open window. The air smelled like earth and truth. This was my house, and I was still here. Truth, when used right, doesn't shout. It builds. It stacks itself brick by brick until it's too solid to be ignored. Sierra and Cameron built their plan on assumptions and arrogance, but I was building mine on paper, ink and history, and paper lasts longer than lies. The day Amara returned with her full legal brief, it was raining. She wore a slate-grey trench coat, her hair pulled back in a low knot. She didn't knock, just stepped in and said, "We're ready." I took the folder from her hands. It was thicker than I expected. A weight. Inside was everything. Walter's letter, the forged deed, financial records, adoption documentation, handwriting analysis from a third-party expert, and a notarized statement of events signed by me and witnessed by a local notary from Amara's firm. I flipped through slowly. With every page, I could feel something returning to me. Not control, not power, clarity. We met in the study that afternoon, while Sierra was out at her yoga class and Cameron had driven into Charleston for a meeting. Amara spread everything out across Walter's old desk, the same one he used to sit at with a glass of scotch, paying bills and sorting through political flyers he never mailed. She handled the documents with the care of someone used to handling bombs. "This is more than enough for a restraining order on asset movement," she said. "We'll stop any attempt to transfer or sell the house. But I want to go further." I looked at her. "How far?" "As far as it takes," she replied. "If they pressured you while Walter was incapacitated, if Sierra or Cameron forged your name or presented that deed to an institution, we're looking at fraud and potential civil damages." I said nothing, not because I was afraid, but because I needed a moment to let those words land in the bones they belonged to. "I don't want to destroy them," I finally said. "I want the truth to be louder than their story. I want the house. I want my name back. And I want them to know I was never weak." Amara gave me a slow, sure smile. "Then we move forward?" That night, I began the next part of the plan: documentation. While the house slept, I photographed every room, the condition of the furniture, the original woodwork, the fading wallpaper Walter's uncle had installed with his bare hands in 1964. I documented the family heirlooms Sierra wanted donated, and the art Cameron planned to auction under his name. I took a photo of the kitchen windowsill, where the geraniums bloomed brighter than ever. I made video recordings, speaking directly to the camera, describing the house's history, room by room, and my memories in them. I didn't cry. I didn't waver. I was calm, deliberate, an archivist, a witness, the voice of a house that had too long been silenced. Amara filed our first motion 2 days later, a cease and desist to prevent the sale or listing of the property, a request for preliminary injunction, and a notice of potential litigation naming both Cameron and Sierra. We didn't serve it yet. "Wait," I said. "Not yet. I want them to see the foundation shift under them. I want them to feel the walls tighten before the door slams." She nodded. "We'll time it right." Meanwhile, I went deeper into the house. There were corners of the attic even I hadn't touched in years. In one trunk, I found receipts for the original foundation work. In another, letters from Walter's uncle to state representatives, documents that showed how this house had once saved a boy from political ruin and given him sanctuary. I added them all to the record, not because the court needed them, but because I did. I needed to remind myself that this house had always been more than brick and wood. It had been a vault, a promise, a second chance, for Walter, and now, for me. Sierra started to notice. One morning, she walked into the kitchen and saw me scanning documents on my old flatbed scanner. "What are you working on?" she asked lightly. "Just sorting the family archive," I said. "For the record." She smiled, but her eyes narrowed. Later that day, I caught her in the study, rifling through drawers. "What are you looking for?" I asked from the doorway. She jumped. "Just checking for some old tax files. Cameron thought they might be here." "They're not." She paused. "You've been busy lately." I stepped inside the room. "So have you." Our eyes met, no pretense left, only calculation. "You should be careful," she said, voice sweet and sharp. "Stress at your age isn't ideal." I smiled. "Neither is underestimating an archivist." She didn't speak again, just walked out, heels tapping a little too fast. That night, I wrote Walter another letter. "My love, the house is waking up. The floors creak louder. The wind sings through the eaves like it used to. I think it knows I'm fighting for it. For us. They think I'm brittle. But you always knew I was made of harder things. You trusted me with your truth. Now I'll make them answer for theirs. With everything, Marietta. I tucked the letter into the cedar box beside his old watch and wedding ring. Just in case. 2 days later, Amara returned with a sealed envelope. "We've been assigned a court date," she said. 3 weeks. I nodded. That's time enough. Time enough for what? For them to walk right into it, I said. That evening, as Cameron and Sierra argued quietly in the next room over a budget that didn't include me, I sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe. The floor beneath my chair groaned. The wind tapped the shutters. The refrigerator rattled softly like an old man clearing his throat. It was still alive. And so was I. The invitation came in the form of a family group text, something Sierra created months ago and named Boone Legacy Planning. It was Cameron's idea, of course. "Let's gather everyone," he wrote. "A final conversation about next steps with full transparency." As if transparency had ever been part of their plan. The meeting was set for Saturday at 3 p.m. in the parlor. Sierra ordered catered hors d'oeuvres from a boutique Charleston kitchen, linen napkins, rosemary crackers, sparkling water in tall, thin glasses, all for show. By noon, they'd moved the furniture around, creating a false symmetry, like a courtroom dressed as a living room, chairs in a circle. Walter's favorite armchair pushed to the far corner like it was in the way. They even lit a vanilla-scented candle. I wore navy blue, not black, not soft florals. Navy was the color I wore the day I defended my senior thesis, the day Walter first kissed me, the day I signed the final mortgage payment on this house. At 2:55, I stepped into the room. 10 people were there. Relatives, business partners, 2 neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Cameron stood near the fireplace, posture perfect, jaw tight. Sierra hovered nearby, flipping through a thin folder with highlighted lines and labeled tabs. I didn't say a word. Amara arrived precisely at 3 SOGs. She was dressed like a scalpel, precise, sharp, and made for cutting through lies. She gave me a single nod and sat beside me. On her lap, a slim black briefcase. Cameron cleared his throat and began. "Thanks everyone for coming," he said. "This isn't easy but necessary. As you all know, since Dad's condition declined, we've had to start thinking about the future of the Boone estate. My mother has, understandably, been under a lot of stress." He paused, glanced at Sierra. She took over. "There have been concerns, legal and emotional, that we felt needed to be addressed openly. It's come to our attention that certain decisions may not be in the best interest of the family or the estate." My stomach didn't twist. My heart didn't race. I simply waited. Cameron turned back to the group. "We want Mum to be comfortable, but we also need to ensure the property is cared for responsibly. So we've brought documentation today that outlines a transition plan. She'll move to a beautiful, peaceful condo near the water. The house will remain in the family, under our stewardship." He said stewardship like it was a sacred calling. "And the deed?" someone asked from the crowd. "That's part of the process," Sierra answered. "There have been signatures, though." She glanced at me. "There's been some confusion about timing." Amara stood. The room went still. "If I may," she said. "My name is Amara Sterling, counsel for Marietta Boone. I'm here to provide clarity, not confusion." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "First, we'd like to clarify that Mrs. Boone did not, in fact, sign the deed transfer presented to you. This She held up a document. Is a certified handwriting analysis confirming that the signature was forged. A hush fell. Sierra's face tightened. Cameron took a step forward. We don't know anything about... Amara raised her hand, silencing him. Second, Walter Boone, registered legally as Augustus Shaw, left behind a personal letter, a notarized birth certificate, and sealed adoption documentation indicating that Cameron Boone is not his biological heir. Gasps. Someone's glass clinked hard against their knee. Amara continued, calm and precise. While this does not diminish the emotional bond between them, it is a crucial legal distinction in matters of estate inheritance. Cameron's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sierra stepped in, voice brittle. This is a family matter, not a courtroom. Amara looked directly at her. Then perhaps you should not have forged documents. She turned to me. I stood slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I pulled from my handbag a leather folder. Inside, Walter's letter, the original deed, and a photograph of Walter, as a boy, beside the uncle who saved him. I held up the letter. Walter left me this, I said, voice steady. He trusted me with the truth. I never asked for this war. I only asked for peace, for respect, for memory. I looked directly at Cameron. You used to play piano in this room, remember? Your fingers barely reached the keys. You cried when you missed a note. And I told you, mistakes are how we grow. My voice wavered, but only for a second. You've made mistakes, I said. But this wasn't a misstep. This was betrayal, calculated, quiet, and cruel. Cameron stared at the floor. Sierra looked at him, then back at me. You were never going to give this up, she whispered. Were you? I smiled, small and certain. No, because this house doesn't belong to your ambition. It belongs to my history. I handed the letter to Amara. She passed it to the guests. Silence. The kind of silence that only comes when truth lands too hard to deny. One of the neighbours, Miss Green, who used to bring pound cake on Sundays, stood up first. I think I've heard enough, she said. Marietta, you let us know what you need. Others followed. One by one, they left the room. Not in anger, in shame. Cameron's shoulders collapsed. He turned to Sierra. You said we could handle this. No, she hissed. You said she was weak. That evening I sat alone in the parlour. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache, but exhales. Walter's armchair was back in its place. The geraniums in the window caught the last light of day. And me? I didn't feel victorious. I felt visible. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't a shadow. I was the light they couldn't hide anymore. The house was quieter than I had ever heard it, not because it was empty, but because it was honest. After the confrontation, there were no more clipped greetings at breakfast, no forced smiles in the hallway, no whispers behind closed doors. Just the soft creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, and the faint sound of wind slipping through the old window frames. They hadn't said it out loud, but I knew. They were leaving. I could feel it in the way Sierra stopped correcting the throw pillows on the couch. I saw it in how Cameron avoided my gaze whenever we crossed paths in the hall. The tension had turned stale, bitter. And behind it, I recognized something else blooming. Shame. They didn't pack quickly. That wasn't Sierra's way. No, she folded clothes precisely, rolled cords, labelled boxes in perfect print. The woman who once insisted a home should be curated, not cluttered, now moved like a guest being evicted from a place she tried to redecorate out of memory. I passed her in the hallway carrying a white ceramic bowl, the one she'd once suggested donating. She didn't meet my eyes. Cameron, on the other hand, was slower. Not because he had more to carry, but because each step seemed heavier. He sat on the edge of his childhood bed for longer than necessary, holding an old baseball glove he hadn't used in 20 years. He ran his fingers along the stitching, then set it down and walked away without packing it. I watched from the hallway, unseen. That glove had been Walter's, a gift, handed down with care, not obligation. Cameron had forgotten that, but the house remembered. By late afternoon, the black SUV pulled into the driveway, the same one they'd once used to take Walter to his neurology appointments. Funny, how full circle moments don't always feel poetic. Sometimes they just sting. Sierra came down first, carrying 2 suitcases and a box of files. She wore sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. Her lips were pressed together, not in grief or apology, but in the quiet fury of someone who didn't get what they came for. She stopped in the foyer to adjust the strap on her purse. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching her. "Leaving anything behind?" I asked, voice calm. She didn't look at me. "Nothing worth keeping." I nodded. "That's how I know it's mine." She paused, just for a moment, but didn't reply. Then she walked out the front door, her heels making no sound on the tile. The door shut gently behind her. No slam, no final word, just absence. Cameron lingered. He stood in the dining room, staring at the table where we'd once celebrated his high school graduation. Walter had grilled steaks. I'd made lemon pie. He had given a shaky little toast about gratitude, manhood, and legacy. And now, here he was, 38 years old, standing like a boy trying to find his way back into a moment that no longer wanted him. I waited at the threshold. When he finally turned to me, his eyes were rimmed with something unspeakable. Guilt. Or maybe the remains of love. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. I nodded. "You always do, until someone says no." He looked down. "I never wanted to hurt you," he added, quieter. "But you did," I said. "You hurt what raised you. You tried to sell what protected you. You let someone else convince you it was yours to take." His eyes welled, but he blinked them clear. "Dad! Walter. He would have understood." "No," I said firmly. "He would have forgiven you, but don't confuse that with understanding." He opened his mouth again, but the words didn't come. So I gave him mine. A line I'd rehearsed quietly, not in front of the mirror, but in the places that mattered. In my chest, in my gut, in the roots of this house. "You don't inherit this house, Cameron. You inherit his name. That's the only legacy that ever mattered." The sentence settled like dust. He looked at me, not with anger, not even sadness, just the numb acceptance of someone who finally knew the truth wasn't theirs to reshape. He turned, slowly, picked up his suitcase, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. No storm, no screaming, just a closing. I sat on the stairwell after they were gone, not crying, just breathing. The air felt clearer. I didn't need celebration. I didn't need applause. I just needed the house to settle back into itself, and it did, inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat. Later, I walked room to room, touching walls, running my palm across door frames. I pulled out the linens Sierra had deemed too tired and washed them, dried them on the line out back, like Walter always liked. I opened every curtain and let the light in. I opened every window and let the wind talk. The house had been holding its breath. Now it exhaled. In the study, I found a box they had left behind. Inside was the brass nameplate Sierra had custom ordered. the Boone estate. I remembered the day she'd hung it, beaming like she'd branded the house into something new, something commercial. I walked it out to the fireplace, lit a match, and fed it to the flames. It burned quick. The brass warped, blackened, and collapsed into itself. That nameplate never meant anything. The house was never an estate. It was a story. And I was the only one left who could tell it right. That night, I brewed a cup of Earl Grey. I added a single jasmine petal and stirred slowly. Then I sat at the kitchen table, beside the window, where the geraniums now bloomed wild and red, their petals almost glowing in the moonlight. Defiant. Alive. Like me. It started with a single step down. After all the noise had gone, the packing tape, the forced apologies, the last echo of Sierra's heels, there was only quiet. For days, I wandered the house in this strange stillness, relearning how to live with peace. I made coffee without anyone watching my every move. I sang in the kitchen again. I even left a book open on the dining table, something Sierra had once called clutter. But the basement door remained shut, not locked, just closed, as if it needed permission from both of us to open again. One morning, I stood in front of it with Walter's old flashlight in one hand, and my heart beating like a metronome. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Closure? Understanding? Maybe just proof that what had happened hadn't broken me entirely. The door creaked open like it had been holding its breath too, and I stepped down. The basement air was thick, damp, and honest. Nothing had changed. The floor was still bare concrete, the smell of mildew still clung to the walls, and the faint outline of old shelves remained on the far wall like the ghost of utility past. But I wasn't the same. The last time I was here, I had been dragged down, literally and figuratively, forced to sit in the dark with the weight of betrayal pressing into my chest. I remembered Walter's cough, the way he'd clutched my hand, the words he'd whispered like a secret prayer. They don't know what's behind that wall. Now I did, and it was time to turn that knowing into something that could not be buried again. I began with a broom, sweeping away cobwebs, dust, broken screws, and the occasional spider that scurried like it had been waiting too long to be left in peace. I wiped each corner of the room with vinegar and lemon water. A symbolic act, maybe. But I wanted the place to smell like something living, something claimed. I wore Walter's old button-up shirt as a smock and tied a red bandana around my head like I did in my 20s when we first moved in. My knees ached, my fingers cracked from scrubbing, but I kept going. It wasn't punishment, it was rebirth. Piece by piece, I transformed that space. I repainted the walls a soft cream, a colour Walter once called porch sunrise. I installed new lighting, warm and soft, not the flickering bulbs of before. I added a dehumidifier, a standing fan, and finally a small rug I found rolled up in the attic. Its corners curled, but I liked that. Imperfect, like me. Then came the shelves. I called a local craftsman, Marvin, who remembered Walter from town meetings. When I told him I needed sturdy shelving to store some family history, he didn't ask too many questions. "Not just a storage room?" he asked as he measured. "No," I said. "It's for the stories that got left behind." He paused, then nodded with a look I couldn't name. Respect, maybe. 2 weeks later, the shelves arrived. Oak, hand-stained, wide, enough for books, deep enough for memory. I started filling them, not with items, but with intentions. There were the letters from Walter's uncle, the ones warning him to change his name and lay low. There were faded photographs from my youth, me in a blue dress beside Walter, who had been too shy to smile. A stack of old piano sheets from Cameron's childhood. Newspaper clippings about the Boone family's quiet generosity, donations no one ever publicized. I didn't organize them by date. I organized them by feeling. The years we pretended. The years we endured, the years. We became each section had room to grow, and they would. I included my journals too, pages where I'd scrawled my rage, my sorrow, my fear. But also pages where I recorded joy, the smell of Walter's neck after a long day, the sound of the porch swing when it rained, Cameron's first laugh. That archive wasn't meant to document just what was lost. It was a monument to what survived. Elise came next. She was a young woman from the local college, studying archival science, sent to help me sort and catalogue. She showed up wearing oversized glasses and carrying more curiosity than boxes. "This is different," she said softly, walking the length of the room. "It doesn't feel like a museum." "It isn't," I said. "It's still breathing." Elise volunteered twice a week. She labelled things gently, as if they could bruise. Sometimes she brought me stories of her own grandmother, a seamstress who never got her name on anything she made. One day, she left behind a photo of her grandma at a sewing machine and said, "She belongs here too." And she did. So did others. I opened the archive, not with a ribbon cutting or some public ceremony, but with a tea circle, 6 women from the neighbourhood. We sat in a circle on mismatched chairs and passed around old letters and fabric swatches. One woman brought a church programme from 1952. Another brought her husband's military tags. We cried. We laughed. We remembered. Word spread. A local paper wrote a feature. Boone Home becomes living archive of Southern memory. I received letters in the mail, some anonymous, others signed. Strangers who had read about it, seen the photos. They sent copies of family recipes, birth records, wedding announcements, and even old cassette tapes. I made a shelf just for them. The voices who reached back. One night, I stayed late. The basement, once the site of my humiliation, was now aglow in soft light. Billie Holiday played from a corner speaker. I sipped Earl Grey from Walter's favourite mug. I looked around and felt something deep in my bones. Not pride, not even victory. Something softer. Belonging. The house had grown around the truth. Not in spite of it. Because of it. I walked over to the mural Elise's cousin had painted. A great tree sprouting from the centre of the room. Its roots twined into the floor. Its branches wrapped across the ceiling. In its trunk, a woman stood with her hands pressed against a wall, her eyes closed. I stared at her a long time, then reached out. And for the first time in my life, I whispered, "Thank you, Marietta." Because I had finally come home to myself. Walter died on a Tuesday. It was spring, but not the loud kind. The air was gentle that day, the sky an unassuming blue, and the wind smelled faintly of cut grass and honeysuckle. The geraniums on the kitchen windowsill had bloomed again, red and resilient, like they were reminding me not to forget where I came from. He passed quietly, without pain, in the same armchair he used to read in, with my hand in his, and my head resting lightly on his shoulder. His last breath was soft, as if even death respected his silence. No grand gestures, no last confessions. Just a sigh, like the end of a song. He left the world the way he had lived in it, steady, tender, and full of secrets meant only for love to carry. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I made his tea, as if it were just another morning. I folded his sweater and laid it across the arm of the chair. I whispered that the garden needed watering. It wasn't denial. It was ritual, habit built over a lifetime. Because grief doesn't announce itself. It arrives in the things you continue doing, even when there's no longer anyone to do them for. The funeral was small, intimate. Just a few neighbours, Elise and her cousin, Amara, and a handful of people who had once known Walter by other names. No fancy speeches, no religious pomp. Just Billie Holiday, humming through a small speaker, and a scattering of memories told like old fables. He was buried under the maple tree in our backyard, the same one whose roots had begun to press against the basement wall years ago. I used to worry those roots would crack the foundation. But now, I knew better. Roots don't break things. They hold them together. I stayed by his grave long after everyone else had gone. The chairs were still out, the soil freshly turned. I sat there, hands in my lap, and looked at the tree above him. "You always knew how this would end, didn't you?" I asked. The wind didn't answer, but a leaf fluttered down and landed on my shoulder. I took that as a yes. That night, I went down into the basement. Not because I had to, because I needed to. The moment I stepped onto that familiar concrete floor, I felt it, the hum of something living. The walls, now painted a soft cream, glowed under the golden light of the string bulbs. The mural of the tree, the one Elise's cousin painted, seemed to wrap itself around me, branches outstretched like arms wide open. I walked past the shelves, past the section labelled "The Years We Pretended," past the archive of letters Walter had hidden. I paused at the folder marked Adoption Deed, A. Shaw, and then I reached a new box I had prepared, but never opened. It was labelled, simply, Marietta. Inside were pieces of me I had once buried, early poetry, unfinished letters to my younger self, Polaroids from before I was a boon, even a tape recording of me singing at 19. I laughed quietly at the voice, slightly off-key, full of too much hope. I sat in the armchair, held the box to my chest, and whispered, "I remember you." Not out of nostalgia, out of reverence, because I had forgotten how to be just Marietta. And now, after everything, I had found her again. Life settled into a quiet rhythm after Walter's passing. Not the hollow kind. There was too much story in these walls for that. Instead, it was the kind of peace you earn after chaos, the way the air stills after a storm. I tended the garden again. The geraniums, once scorched and forgotten, thrived under my care. I even added daisies and lavender, just because I could. People continued visiting the archive. Students, historians, neighbours. A young woman drove from 3 towns over to see the mural. She stood in front of it, with tears in her eyes, and said, "I didn't know I needed this until I saw it." She left behind a recipe from her grandmother and a photograph of a farmhouse long since torn down. I gave them a home on the shelves. Each story that entered the room was a stone in the foundation, not of a house, of a legacy. Cameron never came back. I received a letter from him once. No return address, just a single page, folded neatly. It said, "I understand now. I'm sorry. I hope you're still growing the geraniums." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because forgiveness had already happened, in silence, in distance, in the simple decision not to become what had tried to erase me. I had chosen myself. That was enough. I began hosting storytelling nights in the basement. Nothing formal, no flyers or RSVPs, just a circle of chairs and a pot of tea. People came with their voices and their grief, their joy, their forgotten names. They told stories they hadn't dared to say aloud before, about migration, lost love, shame, faith, motherhood. One night, Someone asked me if I would share something of my own. I smiled, and I did. I told them about a woman who lived in a house too big for her pain, who once cooked soup for people who wanted her gone, who found a truth in the wall that could have destroyed her, but didn't, because she faced it, and she turned it into a room full of light. The last scene I want to remember is this. I'm standing at the basement window, just as the sun sets. The light hits the roots of the maple tree, now visible through the softened dirt. I place my hand on the wall where Walter's secret once lived. It's warm, alive. I trace the curve of a root with my fingers. It doesn't move, but I feel it. I feel me, all the versions of me, woven into this place. And I say, I lost the family I thought I had, but I found the woman who was willing to fight for love. That's my legacy. They wanted to take my house, but they helped me return to myself. My name, my voice, my peace. Sometimes revenge doesn't come in fire or fury. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet reclaiming of your name, your space, your truth. Marietta didn't scream. She remembered. She didn't strike back. She outlived the lie and built something beautiful in its place. And maybe that's the most powerful revenge of all. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even a wound, I invite you to share it in the comments. Not for drama, but for healing. Because stories like this, they don't just end, they echo.